Welcome to the Knox bedroom, where Henry Knox and his family stayed during the winter encampment of 1778 to 1779. But who was Henry Knox? Henry Knox was born July 25, 1750 in Boston, the seventh of 10 sons. His father was a shipmaster who left for the West Indies when Henry was 9 and never returned. To help the family finances, Henry was apprenticed to a bookseller. He was an avid reader and especially interested in military history, science, and artillery. At age 21, Henry opened his own store in Boston. He was described as gregarious, jovial, quick of mind, and highly energetic, having blue eyes, ruddy cheeks, and a broad figure. On the day before his 23rd birthday, Henry was bird hunting on an island in the harbor when his fowling piece exploded, destroying the third and fourth fingers of his left hand. Thereafter, he always wrapped that hand in a handkerchief to hide the disfigurement. A few weeks after the accident, Henry met Lucy, the daughter of Thomas Fluker, a businessman and local Tory. Lucy was also fond of books, and as a friend put it, especially the books sold by Knox, to whose shelves she had frequent recourse. She called him Harry, and he referred to her as my charmer. Despite her family's objections, Lucy and Henry married in June 1774. Shortly after the battles of Lexington and Concord, the newlyweds fled Boston in April of 1775. Lucy sewed Henry's sword into her skirts. After sunset, they climbed into a small boat and rowed toward the mainland, where the Patriot forces were encamped. Henry immediately offered his services to General Artemas Ward, who was commanding the hodgepodge of militias surrounding Boston at that time. Ward introduced Henry to George Washington on July 5th, just 3 days after Washington arrived to take command of the Continental Army. Washington saw potential and commissioned Knox as a colonel for his knowledge and handling of artillery. Thus began a friendship that would last for decades. In the fall of 1775, Washington asked Knox to retrieve the cannon at Fort Ticonderoga on Lake Champlain. The fort was now in Patriot hands. So, Knox departed in November 1775. The arduous 300-mile trip would take him across the Berkshire Mountains and require crossing the Hudson River on 4 separate occasions. Using barges on water and teams of oxen and horses on land, Knox completed one of the greatest logistical feats of the war. He called it his noble train of artillery. Knox returned in late January with 58 mortar and cannon, a combined weight of about 120,000 pounds. Upon returning, he learned that Washington had promoted the 25-year-old to full colonel. He was now in command of the artillery. In March, the cannon were positioned atop Dorchester Heights, overlooking Boston Harbor. This resulted in the British abandoning Boston, the first victory for the Continental forces. Later, Knox stayed at the Vanderveer House from November 1778 until the summer of 79. There he established America's first military training school, the Pluckeman Artillery Cantonment, the forerunner to West Point. Here, Knox taught gunnery, tactics, and strategy. Henry's wife Lucy and their daughter, also named Lucy, stayed at the Vanderveer House as well. Lucy gave birth in the spring of 1779. The child, named Julia, died a few months later and is buried in the cemetery north of this house. Lucy would eventually give birth to 13 children, only 3 of whom lived to adulthood. The self-taught Boston bookseller was promoted to brigadier general after the Battle of Trenton and later to major general after Yorktown. Of all the general officers who had taken part in the siege of Boston, only 2 were still serving at the time of the British surrender at Yorktown, Nathaniel Greene and Henry Knox. Knox was by Washington's side in every major engagement. Washington wrote, "With respect to General Knox, there is no man in the United States with whom I have been in habits of greater intimacy, no one whom I have loved more sincerely, nor any for whom I have had a greater friendship." 6 days after Congress declared peace, Knox submitted a detailed blueprint for a standing peacetime army, including the recommendation for a U.S. military academy at West Point. He later served as the nation's first Secretary of War, creating both the United States Army and Navy establishing the first federal armories and securing the peace in the Northwest Territory. He was also one of the founding members of the Society of the Cincinnati, which is still active today. Knox moved to Thomaston, Maine in 1795. He kept up a frequent correspondence with Washington in those later years. In 1806, he died from an infection caused by a chicken bone that had lodged in his throat. This Boston bookseller turned general devoted his life to the creation and service of his country. He deserves to be remembered and honored today.